Welcome everyone to this presentation. Today we're going to talk about two very made up but very important words to me, and that is gamification and creativization. But firstly, I would love to know some more about you. So if you could write in the comments below, let me know who you are. Are you a piano teacher? Or are you teaching a different instrument or voice? Because I'm a piano teacher, so a lot of you will be piano teachers, but this is also open to any music teachers of any type. So do let me know what instrument or instruments you're teaching. And also, I'd love to know, are you teaching one-on-one? Are you teaching in small groups, partners, twos, threes, four students at a time? Or are you teaching large groups of students? Are you teaching bands or in a classroom setting in general music education, that kind of thing? Let me know those two things in the comments because I'd love to get to know you guys better. And now let me tell you a little bit about me. So my name is Nicola Canton. I'm the author of the Piano Practice Physician's Handbook. I have a blog which is at colourfulkeys.ie, a games library at vibrantmusicteaching.com, and a Facebook community which is at Vibrant Music Studio Teachers on Facebook. You're all very welcome to join that. It's a lovely place to hang out. All of these things, I wear lots of different hats, but they all come together for me because it's all about moving music education forward, making it more inclusive, more creative. But that's kind of my standard bio. And I give that particular slide a lot at these types of presentations. And today I want to dive a little bit deeper because I want to tell you how I started and how I got going with piano teaching. I started teaching when I was about 15 or 16, not sure exactly. And basically, my teacher said, "Oh, well, you've reached such and such a level now. Might be a good idea to start teaching, instead of getting a part-time job in a shop or something like that, maybe take on a few students. I started when I was your age." So I said, okay, and I started putting flyers around and got my start with teaching. And I was, friendly. I was nice. I certainly liked kids and I got along fine with them. And I don't think I did anything particularly wrong in inverted commas. But I was a bit dry. In fact, more than a bit dry. I followed a very simple formula that was based on how I was taught. So I started with scales probably every single week, and then I reviewed the pieces they'd been working on. Then we did new pieces, lesson over, call it a day, all fine and dandy, right? It was formulaic and it was a bit dull. But like I say, I was friendly. There was nothing massively wrong with the way I was teaching. And my students certainly got better, although I don't think anyone was particularly inspired by my teaching. There was no real passion behind it. There was nothing driving me to teach. Although I loved music and I liked kids, I didn't really have a passion for teaching yet. That started later. But as I went forward, I taught the whole way through the remaining years of secondary school. Then in college, I continued teaching, always part-time, always had a few students, always liked it fine and got along fine. And my students did their exams and they got good results and all that. Then I graduated from college. And I actually didn't study music, I studied fashion design. And I went to work in the fashion industry and decided, okay, I'm going to let go of teaching. It's been a great part-time job, but I'm going to put it aside to go start this internship. So I started my internship with Dunn's. I did that for a year and I decided not to stay on there after a year. And I left and became self-employed, still within fashion. But I took on a few students on the side again. It's what I'd always done, and it was something I was always going to turn to earn a bit of money, right? In a way that I enjoyed and thought what I was okay at, right? But as I did so, I made a pretty amazing discovery this time around. I had a student, and she had moved from Serbia. And I can't remember exactly what it was, but I was looking up something based on a confusion we'd had between us, because she'd learned in that system it was very different, different terms, and also just a different style of teaching. And I wanted to figure out how to teach her something in particular. And so I looked this up on the internet. Maybe you've heard of it. That was my amazing discovery. Google. I searched and I found so many answers. There were so many music education blogs and ideas from other teachers on how I could teach various things. And the more the weeks and the months went by of me turning to the internet and discovering these various things that I could be doing, the more my mind was just completely blown. A lot of this stuff I had no idea about. I had no idea that regular pianists could improvise. I thought that was just the reserve of jazz pianists. I had no idea that students could compose their own music. Again, that seemed like you needed a degree to do that, specifically in composing. I didn't realize that any of this stuff existed. And most importantly for me, I didn't realize that I could bring creativity into teaching. That was something that had never occurred to me. I went to art college and then design college, and yet it had never, ever occurred to me to bring that side of things into teaching. I just never thought of it. And this completely blew my mind, and I started my blog, and I started putting together resources based on ideas and things from my teaching, from the ideas I was learning online, and putting it all together, and with my design skills and all of that, and with my creative thinking skills that I had suddenly realized could be awoken in teaching, it just changed everything for me. And I started to do these two things. I started to creativize, which is a word that I think I have fully made up myself, but I think you can guess what I mean by it. And then gamify, which is a more popular made up word. I started to do these two things, and really they're interrelated to me, but we're going to talk about them slightly separately today. I'm going to take you through gamification as I define it first, and how you can do it effectively, and how I've come to view these things. And then we'll talk a little bit about creativization towards the end of today's presentation. So if you have questions throughout, please do write them in the comments below. I would love to help you out, especially if there's something specific that doesn't make sense to you, or a comment thought you have as I work through. Please do write them in the comments. I'd love to chat about it. But first I have a question for you. And I want to know, has this ever happened to you? A parent calls you up on the phone and they say something like this. And some of you in the room are thinking, yeah, that's fine. What's the big deal? Why is she even showing me this slide? And some of you just went in your minds, or maybe a little bit out loud. You can let me know if you did. So why is it that we balk at this? Why do some of us see that and think, oh my gosh, no. It's because we think that this parent is not going to help with practice. We think that they don't value this skill. This isn't important to them. They don't think it's important. And they don't think this is real education. That's the one that really stings, right? Because we feel like music is kind of pushed aside. At least I do. In schools, in education in general, it's become an extracurricular, and I feel it should be a core subject, and that's why these kind of comments, they can kind of cut a little bit deep. But if we put on our special parent translator headphones, if we're a little bit more attentive to where they're coming from with comments like this, like, I don't want him to be a concert pianist, I just want him to have fun. If we just really think about it, maybe what they're saying is this. Maybe they had a horrible experience. Maybe they just were turned off from music by their own lessons, and they want to provide a different experience for their child. Or maybe they never learned music, but they have some pretty shocking connotations in their head to do with it. Maybe they think it's elitist, stiff, and strict. Because let's face it, it can be these three things. Music education has been pretty elitist. It's an expensive hobby. It has been the reserve of at least the middle and upper classes. It has been pretty stiff too, and pretty strict. We all know the image of the piano teacher rapping the back of the knuckles with a ruler. And while they may not have had that experience, or they may not fully articulate it in that way, they do have these connotations in their mind. And if you think that they don't, if you think that these ideas are totally gone with regards to music lessons, then I want to point you to this image, because this image is at the top of an image search when I searched for the phrase stuck up. Yikes, right? Unfair in our view, but the image is out there. That is how people sometimes can view music education. So maybe when they make those comments, maybe all they're saying is this: I want my child to love music. And I don't think any of us are against that. I don't think any of us can criticize that as a goal. They just want their child to love music, and that's what they mean by fun. So, is this how we're being? Are we just so set in our ways, so stuck on the idea that music has to be taken seriously, that students have to work hard, that we're being a bit funnist or funophobic? That we're kind of throwing away this idea of having fun in lessons just to try and hang on to something that we shouldn't be hanging on to, that could evolve? Well, to answer that question, and to further make my case for fun, I want you to turn your attention completely away from music education to the world of Irish dancing. Now, if you know anything about Irish dancing at all, you might have some connotations of your own in your mind. You might have some associations with Irish dancing. You might be thinking about the image of the arms straight down by the side, or like in this image, on the hips, but you'll see they're not actually using their thumbs. Those hands are completely frozen on the hips there. And it's stiff, right? The costumes are stiff, the look is stiff, the smile is maybe a bit stiff. So you're not alone if you have these ideas to do with Irish dancing in your head. But I think it's about 20 years ago, maybe even more now, there was an evolution in Irish dancing. Riverdance. Riverdance came along at the Eurovision, and they did two rather drastic things. Apart from adding the storyline, which of course helped as well, they added flowing skirts. Sounds silly, and I know I come from a fashion background, but it is actually important that the skirts move freely and that they're more loose. And they added some arm movements, right? And they made fun of themselves a little bit too. So adding that little bit of freedom made a massive difference. And modernizing the costumes and making it that little bit more accessible meant that Riverdance went all over the world. It's in China every year. It's still running in Dublin for several months every summer, in a central theatre in Dublin for all the tourists to attend. So, yes, it was a slight departure from the traditional. But much like with Irish dancing, with music, what we class as traditional, is it really traditional? I mean, in Irish dancing, can you really call neon costumes traditional? I don't think so. It's more a recent tradition, or a case of getting stuck doing things the way they were done with you. And I think we can bring a fresh perspective to these things. I think we can put a new spin on things and still keep that tradition alive, still spread the joy of music, still teach people to love classical music if that's what we want to do. So, fun can do several things for both you and your students. For your students, it can make their lessons feel less like just more school. And if you've had a student who arrives at your studio and sits down and sort of slumps, it's because they've been sitting at a desk all day. And it's just exhausting. It's not what kids are really meant to be doing. And I'm sure more and more schools are getting them up and moving as well. But it's not really all that natural. They need to move and they need to interact with stuff and they need to play. So bringing fun into your studio can help with that. It can also make them make faster progress. I have seen this myself, and I've seen it from vibrant music teaching members all over the world. They're using games to actually accelerate their students' progress. So they're not only having more fun, they're getting further too. And it can allow students to make their own connections, to forge those pathways, and to get those benefits out of music that we often cite, like critical thinking skills and all of this, because they're actually thinking more for themselves in the way we're going to work with this fun formula. And then fun is also great for you too. I think it's important that music teachers laugh during their day. I think we should all be having fun in our studios. And it's too easy for it to turn into a slog if it does go scales, old pieces, new pieces, like my lessons used to. It can help you to communicate and make better connections with your students and build that rapport that is so essential for keeping them in lessons. And it can also mean that you're popular with parents. This is what parents want. They want their kids to have a good time for the most part. And it can fill up your schedule so that you make more money, you're more profitable, you're more successful as a teacher. Now, if you're thinking this, you're totally not alone. And I get it. It feels like another thing to fit into lessons. And this is how I thought of games for quite a long time myself. It feels like there's just no time. It feels like another thing to fit into the lesson plan, and it's impossible because you're already running out of time. And I do get that. But it's actually the wrong question. And if I show you my formula today, I think you'll see how this stuff can be fit in, because it's not actually about fitting it in. It's about starting from this idea of fun and gamification and building your lessons from there. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do that, so don't worry. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take this work that has to happen. Work is real, work is legitimate, and it's important. And music lessons are not easy. Learning it to play an instrument or to sing is not easy. It never will be. It's always going to be work. But it doesn't mean that we can't integrate some fun along the way and make it feel that little bit easier for students. So what we're going to do is we're going to plan fun to get the work done. My formula for doing this is to find the gap, understand the root, and then never reveal the secrets. So, FUN. First of all, find the gap. This could be new information. It could be something that's brand new that your student has never learned before. It could be a new application of old information. So, applying something in a new context. It could be a correction. It could be something that the student is mistaken about. They're not getting it right. They've gotten confused about something, or they have gotten something completely wrong in their head and we're going to fix it. It could be a confusion that it's kind of almost right, but they've mixed it up a little bit. It could be just a tweak in how they understand something and developing it further. So finding the gap. By gap, I mean really anything we want to teach, anything at all. Next, we need to understand the root. This is probably the most important part. So you need to know where your student is starting in relation to this concept, this topic, this gap that we're going to be teaching them. We need to understand each step along the way. What is going to take them from that starting spot forward? Each step, not just jumping to the end. We need to understand the solution to each step, how they're going to be pulled along the path with us, the detours they might take, the misunderstandings that might happen along the way, the confusions, the side steps. And really importantly, we need to know what it looks like when they arrive at their destination. I like to think of this in terms of general goals that we make. You may have heard of SMART goals. So those are specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound or timely. And this applies to everything. So if we take the example of, say, fitness, let's say you had a goal to run more. Well, when have you arrived? When have you run more? Nobody can really say, can they? Because that's not definite enough. Nobody knows when you got there. Whereas if you say, I want to be able to run 5 kilometers in this amount of time, well, then at some stage you will be able to do that if it's realistic. And you will have gotten there and you'll feel that accomplishment. So you want to understand your students' arrival at this understanding of this concept as well as you understand a simple goal like that. And the last stage in our FUN formula is to never reveal the secrets. So you know the route, you know how they get there, but you allow for discovery along the way. You never get behind your student and push them down the path by giving them answers. You're guiding them along, pulling them gently along with questions so that they're following you, but finding their own way. You completely buy into all of the fun because trust me, if you do not consider it a game, if you are not on board, if you are not having fun too, it's not happening. No one's going to believe it. It's not going to be sold on your students either. And most importantly, you never tell. We hear this advice a lot, show, don't tell, or different variations on that theme. But I think it needs reminding very regularly. At least I find it does for myself. So I know I'm not supposed to ever tell, but sometimes there are those times when a student isn't getting something, they have an exam coming up, they need to just do it. And so we just tell them. And it's easy to do. And we're all going to do it from time to time. But I think if we have this reminder going on in our head, to guide our students along, not tell them the answers, but give them questions, we can do it less of the time and they'll have a better learning experience. In other words, all this never reveal the secret stuff means don't be Monica. Plan the fun, but don't tell people what the plan is. Don't let it give away the secrets. So we're going to find the gap, understand the route, and never reveal the secrets. Now I have a few examples for you because I come to presentations like this myself a lot, and sometimes the ideas can be fantastic and I really get on board with them, but it can be hard to implement them in my own studio. And I find when there's real case studies, real examples of how it works and walkthroughs, and I'm allowed to try it myself, it makes a huge difference to how I can apply that learning. Just like with our students, that would make a big difference as well. So I'm going to give you a few case studies, and then we're actually going to do some brainstorming together so that you can really, really get underneath the surface of my fun formula. So the first case study is about ledger lines. So, ledger line notes. I'm sure we've all had students who have problems with these. They're going along grand, they get to a note with a few ledger lines, nothing major, there's only 3 here, right? It's not crazy. And they just panic. Think, I'll never be able to do that. That is impossible. I'm just going to guess randomly, and they just tell me, right? And we probably will. That's the truth. Because it's, again, so tempting to just tell. Or, even worse than that, my least favourite solution to ledger lines from students is, a note with a line must be a C. And this comes in particular with piano method books. Students somewhere along the way have picked up this idea that middle C has a ledger line through it, so all notes with lines are C's. But there's a much bigger problem underlying this, and that's that the student isn't actually understanding what ledger lines are. And if they're not understanding what ledger lines are, I don't think they understand the staff. Because the ledger lines are just an extension of the staff. So if they don't get how they're functioning, if they think anything with a ledger line must be a C no matter how many there are, then perhaps they're memorizing all the notes rather than understanding the internal logic of the grand staff, which is very straightforward, really. So first, along our path to understand the route to get there is going to be function and logic. Then the application of that logic in practice. Then they're going to design a system, or we're going to do it together rather, to be able to work these out. Then all they need is practice and experience with ledger line notes so that they can gain confidence and be absolutely certain of naming ledger line notes when they get to them. So the first activity I would do to get them along this path is staff construction. And what I would ask my student to do is to draw 10 lines, draw 2 sets of 5 lines, and I recommend as many colours as possible because colours make everything more fun. After that, I would ask them to add a treble and a bass clef. I don't really care if they draw the treble clef beautifully at this stage. That's not what I'm teaching in this exercise. So have them refer to sheet music if you need to and add those clefs in. And then what I would do is play a note on the piano, starting in the center of the piano. So I'd start with a D and then a B and work my way outwards. And all along the way, I'm asking them to draw that note. So I'm just playing the note and then saying, okay, can you draw that on the staff now? Now can you draw this one? Now can you draw that one? And working my way out either side until we get to here. Now when we get to here, I'm just going to keep going. I'm not going to say anything about it. I'm just going to keep going. And maybe they'll immediately draw the ledger lines, proving they understand more than they think they do. Maybe they won't at all. Maybe they'll draw some floating notes. Maybe they'll just look at you. Refer to as much music as you need to, as much sheet music, their books, method books, whatever, and encourage them to discover. Keep asking questions until they get all the way to the edge. And if they're still not really getting it, if they're not becoming certain and maybe even a little bit on the bored side with this exercise, then you need to keep going. And I would keep going the whole way to the edge of the piano if that's what it takes. Even if you need to staple pieces of paper along the end of your current piece of paper and all of that, and ends up with this beautiful mess that they can hang on their wall at home, fantastic. Keep going as long as it takes. The next exercise is kind of the reverse. This is chopsticks and plasticine, and these sheets that you see here you can actually download at a link that I'll give you below. So don't worry, you can get access to these. Now, what we do here is kind of the reverse, as I said. So we've got clefs and we've got note names, but there's no lines. So I use the chopsticks, get them to add the chopsticks where they belong as the staff lines, and then add plasticine to create the ledger lines. Again, it's about identifying what the logic of them is. It's about building up that understanding that, okay, well, those notes would just be floating. And so I'll cover over some of the notes and ask them, how would we know that that was a G if it was just floating there? If it was just a note floating in space? And guide them along like that till they create those ledger lines and build up that staff that really makes sense. Next, we would play a game. So those were gamified activities. This is an actual game. It's a board game. Again, you can grab this at the link below. And the way this works is we move all the way across the top and then down the side and then across the bottom. And we're moving in intervals. So they're rolling the die, and if they get a 2, they're moving up a second, so just up a step. If they get a 6th, obviously they move up a 6th. And they have to name all the notes as they go. And the reason I like them to go down as well is so that they make those connections. It's not about remembering what that note is or knowing it in isolation. It's about understanding how the whole staff functions as a unit. Once they have that understanding and they have a system for working it out, such as working from the top line or something like that, all they need is practice. And for that, you need 2 ingredients to get students to really practice something thoroughly. You need competition and you need glory. And the competition doesn't have to be with others, it can totally be with themselves. This here is my challenge board, and stuff like this always fits in on the challenge board because getting their name up there and getting this sticker on the front of their folder is really all they need as motivation to just push them that little bit further to get that practice in. This is the 60-second challenge. In this challenge, they need to name a certain number of notes and play them on the piano. At the bronze level, it's only from bass C to treble G. Silver level is low G to high F. And then the gold level is the one that will introduce ledger line notes, and they'll need to name them super fast to get it under 60 seconds, 3 weeks in a row to get their name on the board and that sticker for the front of their folder. So that's just one way of gamifying, and that's probably what most people mean when they say gamify. They're talking about like computer game levels. I'm talking about a much more holistic understanding of what a game is and play is. So this is one aspect of it, but it's not the whole thing. All of this is gamification. It's everything can be made into a game, in my view. Okay, the next case study I want to share with you is chord inversions. So this is probably most relevant to the pianists among you, but I hope you can apply it anyway. And if your students are doing theory, they're going to need to know this in that context anyway. Now, the first question to answer here is, what exactly do we mean? Because chord inversions is actually not enough of a specific enough of a gap. So do we want them to be able to play with chord inversions when they're playing from lead sheets? Or do we want them to understand chord inversions and identify them in theory workbooks on theory exams? Or do we want them to be able to label the chord inversions, figure them out, and find them in their repertoire? All of these three things are good, and all of them are important, and we probably want all these things, but we have to pick one to start with. Where are you going to start? For me, I'm going to start with the practical application because I prefer to start on the piano, understanding these things by playing, and get to the theory later. So to pull them along that path, we're going to start with major and minor chord construction. So our student does not even know the chords yet, okay? Then from there, we're going to look at keyboard recognition, recognizing those chords on the keyboard. Then from there, they're going to construct the inversion slowly at the keyboard. Then they're going to be able to recall them from instinct. So they're going to get some practice that's going to make it easy for them to recall them automatically. And lastly, then, they're going to apply that knowledge in the context of lead sheets. So one of my favorite activities for practicing chords, inversions and root position ones, is with an app called iReal Pro. This is fantastic just for doing drills of any kind, for playing along with chord charts. It's basically a band in an app if you haven't used it. And I love it especially for things like technical drills because it makes them fun. It makes them into play when they could be so dry. So for major chords, I have these various drills I do. So they start off doing just white keys, and then they do chromatic, moving from C to D flat to D to E flat up that way, and then they move around the circle of fifths. And I do that with all the majors and then all the minors. Now, I'm going to show you a video now, and that's actually going to be my student working with the major white keys. So this is the first stage. Okay, so I hope you can see, that you could see her bopping along there. She's really enjoying it. She loves it. This student actually has DCD, so she has even more trouble playing the chords, and this type of practice has been fantastic for her. After my students know their chords somewhat, we would work on the relationship of major and minor and that semitone drop using a game like Don't Major My Minor. So this is a semi-board game, if you call it that, where students each have their individual keyboard in front of them, and they lay out the chords, and they're trying not to let others make them into a minor by dropping that semitone. So it helps them to recognize the chord on the staff, lay it out on the keyboard, and understand the relation and the difference between major and minor chords. Once they know their major and minor chords, that's when I get to the inversions. So I find it so important that they really know them thoroughly before we touch inversions, because otherwise it just becomes a tangle in their heads. And I felt that tangle myself, so I don't want to impose that on my students. So once they really know their chords, that's when we move to inversions. And I actually start this at the piano with little erasers. So we put the rubbers, on the keys. I ask them to lay out a particular chord. So for example, in this photo, it's D major, right? So I ask them to lay out D major for me. They find where the tokens go. And then I'll ask them to take that D and put it up the top. Okay, now let's try playing that new chord. It's got the same ingredients, but they're in a different order. And then we take the F sharp and put that at the top. And we practice doing this process a lot of times because it allows them to discover how this is working, what's really happening when we respell a chord in an inversion. It's not just in a different order, but it's actually physically respelling it. And it allows them to understand that in a much better way than if their fingers are on the keys, because they can see what's going on a lot better with a token on the keys than they can with their actual hand in the way. So I'll have them do this lots of times, and then I'll start asking them for particular inversions. So please lay out second inversion of C major, and so on straight away. So I have another quick video to show you of this. This is two of my students. They're working during their piano buddy time on this type of keyboard mapping exercise. Excellent. Antonia, they would now want to go into C major, first inversion.
Okay. So you'd be here, you would be here, and you'd be here. Am I right?
Yep. Now they want A major, second inversion.
Just need to
Let's count those how many times. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Done.
No.
Is this
4.
it? No,
3
second
hops.
inversion.
1, 2, 3, 4. And then 3 for the brown hedgehog. 1, 2, 3. That's D flat. Okay, so there we're working on laying them out based on semitones and also on that idea of respelling the chords. So after they understand inversions and they've gotten a bit of practice laying out specific inversions I'm asking for, that's when they need to learn how to identify them quickly and really get to grips with them and how they look, how different inversions look in different keys. So this game works on that specific concept. It's called Inversion Diversions, and on the outer ring road here, they're working on root position chords. And if they switch to the middle path, the red path, the train tracks when it's a first inversion chord, and then to the blue footpath when it's a second inversion chord. And there's a subliminal message hidden in here, which is that the blue path, the second inversions, which are the trickiest, again in inverted commas, is the shortest. And the root position chords, while they may be the quickest to identify, is the longest path. So they're the unlucky ones to get. And of course now all we need is some competition and some glory. So I'll work on these levels. Chord Apprentice is the first level of chords. So that is where my students are just working on major and minor chords. And once they can play with the iReal Pro track around the circle of fifths at 80 beats per minute, that's when they have passed that level. And then at the next level, Chord Scholar, they're working on the inversions. So I hope you can see through those two detailed examples how I'm finding the gap, identifying what's really missing, what I want to teach, understanding the route to get them there, understanding every step they might need to take to pull them along that path, and then disguising that with fun and games and activities that allow them to discover it for themselves. But I don't want to leave it at just that because 2 is not enough examples to really give you grounding in this. However, I also don't want to use up the whole presentation giving you examples. So that's why I have a rapid fire round. So I'm going to take you through a couple more here, and then we're going to do some brainstorming together to further ground ourselves in how this is all going to work. So quick case study number 1 is all about sight singing. Now, in the case of sight singing, I like to do it using solfa. So that's the way I'm going to go. I've decided my destination is that they can sing with solfa for their sight singing exercises. I would start this out then with do, re, mi ear training. And the way I make this gamified and fun is I play do, re, mi, and then do, re, or mi. And if I play do, they're sitting on the floor. If I play re, they have to answer by kneeling. And if I play mi, they have to answer by standing up. And of course, this can then be expanded to include so and la, and then eventually fa and ti as well. Then I'll have them practice singing with their scale. So I'll make this part of their scale challenges that they're doing anyway, that are fantastic for building up their technique and their understanding of scales. Have them sing with all of them. Why not? They should sing them all in solfa while they play. After that, I'd use a game like Sidestep Solfa. This is inspired actually by a video which I'm sure a lot of you have seen. It's with Bobby McFerrin and it's on the TED stage. I believe it's at TED anyway, and he's playing the audience. Have any of you ever seen this? So in this one, he's moving side to side, and the audience instinctively sings a pentatonic scale, and it's so wonderful. And so I've got these solfa signs that I lay out on the floor, and one student will hop side to side, and other students, or me and a student, if it's just the two of us working in a lesson, will sing these patterns back based on the actions that they're doing. After that, I get them to sing their pieces in solfa, so bringing it back to their repertoire, connecting everything together, get them to sing their pieces in solfa so that they understand their pieces better. Great practice for their repertoire, but also builds up their knowledge of solfa and how to sing with it and their innate understanding of how the intervals feel. And from there, it's very simple for them to sing those sight singing tests that they get in exams in Ireland. Simple, easy as can be. Next week's case study is about intervals. So let's say the problem your student is having is that they're not seeing the patterns at all. They're not recognizing that those patterns are there when they see intervals, and therefore they're working out each individual note. Oh my gosh, what a painful way to read music. Well, then I would start with the floor staff. I have this floor staff. You can make one yourself. It's actually super simple to do. Just get a shower curtain and draw on it with permanent marker. It doesn't have to be like this. Like I say, I have a fashion degree, so I can sew a bit. So I have this floor staff anyway, and I love doing intervals in this way because they can really see the distances and how we're counting them on this large scale in a way that they just can't always when we're pointing with our finger on little sheet music, right? So I'll lay out the floor staff, and I'll ask them to put down the landmark note. So we'll do this as landmark note practice first, and then I'll ask them, okay, now put this one a certain distance. So I'll say, a fourth down from treble G, a second up from treble G, etc. So they're laying these out based on my instructions, and therefore they really have to be able to count out the intervals and see the patterns for themselves. Then we'll get a lot more practice with these patterns using this game. This is interval, sprinterval, schminterval, and in this one they're moving up the staff in intervals. Now, I play this first with them aloud to count it out, remembering to count 1 where they are, and then 2 when they move, because the second is actually the first movement, right, in intervals. So I'll allow them to play by counting it out, tapping their counter, and then we'll play again, and they'll have to jump forward. So that's building that pattern recognition as well as just the understanding, being able to count it in their head and see what the distances are. Then we'll do some pattern matching using a game like Interval Bob. In this one, they're matching all seconds in their hand in a kind of Go Fish style game, okay? So this allows them to see that a second is a second is a second, even if it looks different. And they'll also notice that if something is the same, it matches in terms of whether they match or not. So are they both line notes or both space notes? Are they different from each other? Seeing things like that isn't always instinctive for students, and giving them an opportunity to practice that in a game takes the pressure off. It takes it from feeling like you're testing them, like do you not see that, to them just interacting with it, exploring it for themselves and coming to these conclusions. Then again, I'd like to bring it back to their repertoire. So I'll get them to do some score studies where they're colouring different intervals in different colours on their music. Actually, I like to do this before they even start a piece, especially a challenging piece. Last quick case study is about phrasing, because I want to prove to you that this isn't just about theory, it's not just about note names and intervals and things like that. It can be about something as musical and as technique based as phrasing. So let's say that your student is a piano student and their wrist is on lockdown, meaning they're not able to shape the phrases, because really when we shape the end of a phrase, it comes from the wrist, right? So if their wrist is frozen, there's no beautiful, graceful ending to a phrase, it just bumps off, right? So I would start this with the analogy of them being a puppet. And I would tie imaginary puppet strings around their wrists and direct them with my hands, pulling up from the wrist and encouraging them to feel that. In fact, if they really can't feel it, and I have this in my book actually, I will put a elastic band, a really big one, around their wrist and pull up so that they can feel what that feels like, encouraging them to go floppy in the rest of their arm. So I'm doing that, and then I'll have them do that in the context of pieces. So they have to watch me in their peripheral vision and see when I'm pulling up their wrist and really get that sensation into their hands in a very exaggerated way. Then, to give them some more independence with this, I'll use some animal imagery. I love for this the image of a whale coming up underneath and its blowhole blowing their wrist into the air. So I'll get that image into their head and have them practice having the whale come up, and of course I'll get a little toy or even just with my hand pretend to be the whale at the right time so that they can get that imagery stuck in their mind. And then we'll bring this into their repertoire using doodles or stickers. So I would get them to draw, or I would draw a whale. If you're not a drawer, get your students to do it. Even if you are, get your students to do it, because it actually means more. It sticks in their mind better if they're the one drawing. So add some pictures. Yes, if it is an exam piece and you need to keep it clean, do a photocopy just for doodling on and then throw it away later due to copyright restrictions. But it really is so valuable to get them to draw all over it. For most students, this makes a massive impact. So I hope this has started to crack all this open for you and make this fun stuff into something really concrete that you can apply in your lessons, using my formula, using my step-by-step process for how to think about these things in a creative way, in a way that can gamify the concepts for students. I want you to think more about this though. So I want to turn it over to you. Now you'll find a worksheet directly below this video, a link to it. So download that or make your own notes and answer these questions. Pause the video and ask yourself these questions. What are you struggling to teach right now? Write down the gap. In other words, find the gap. And how could it be gamified? How could you gamify it? I have space there for writing down the steps along the way and gamifying each one. So like I say, pause this video right now, come up with your gamification ideas, and then when you unpause it, make sure to write them in the comments below. Okay, welcome back. Did you have some ideas? Write them in the comments below, and also make sure to write in if there's ones that you're like, yeah, but this can't be gamified, or I don't get what to do with this step, or I'm not sure what the steps are for this idea. If you're struggling with one of them, turn it over to us, turn it over to the community. Write in the comments below what the problem is, how you're going to solve it, or any missing pieces that you need some help with, and I'll chime in, and hopefully so will some of you as well, as you have ideas. Okay, so briefly, I want to talk to you as well about creativization, this other made-up word that, again, I'm pretty sure I made this one up, but I think you can guess what I mean by it. First of all, I want to give you a little history lesson. Now, don't worry, it's not a real history lesson. So, those of you who hated history in school, this is not history. It's a very simple history lesson. It's about these three dudes and one lady. So, Mr. Bach, Mr. Mozart, Mr. Beethoven, and Miss Schumann, my token woman for the day. I want you to think about this question. What was their tradition? Because actually, we talk about the classical tradition a lot. Certainly in Ireland, we do. I think in a lot of countries, we do. We say things like, oh, I was taught traditionally. I had traditional classical lessons. What do we mean by that? Because these are classical composers, okay, Baroque/classical. So, what do we mean by their tradition? Well, they read and wrote music, for sure. And that's often what we mean. But they were also experimenters. They were improvisers and they were embellishers. They were composers after all, but they were explorers. They experimented with stuff. They definitely were big on improvising. So when we talk about the classical tradition, what do we mean? Whether we have a big C or a small c, what do we mean by that? What is the classical tradition? And I'm afraid in this country and in several others, it's come to mean this: exams. I don't know what those four revered composers and many others would think of us calling this the classical tradition. Exam-based teaching. Certainly not their tradition. And I think this stems from a lot of us treating what is supposed to be a syllabus as a curriculum. And I totally include myself in this too for many, many years. So this is not a judgment. It's just an observation and something I think we can work together to improve. Because the exam syllabus really is a syllabus. It is not supposed to be everything that we teach. It is supposed to be an assessment of some stuff. Okay? And the Irish exam board has even said this. I mean, this syllabus versus curriculum idea comes from a talk I attended at the Royal Irish Academy. So they're on board with it. But they've come to be, the exam system has come to be abused a little bit, and it's come to be seen as a curriculum, which it is not supposed to be. A curriculum should be about your priorities, your students' goals. It should be broad and all-encompassing, and in my opinion, it should give tastes of all areas of music that they could explore. Because if we treat the exam syllabus as a curriculum, it's not a comprehensive map of music. It's something like this. It's point A, point B, da 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 da, you have arrived at grade 8. And that is not all music is. There's a lot more going on than that. So I'd like to start fresh and I'd like to think about what are our priorities? What do our students want? And how do we balance all this stuff? Now, these are big questions, and there's a reason a lot of us have turned to exams to give us structure, to provide a structure for ourselves, because this is hard. And I'm not being unsympathetic here. This is genuinely hard. This is struggling through, wading through all the stuff. But I think it's important. So I'd like you to take some time to ask yourself these 3 questions and to write in the comments below what you want for your students. What are your goals for your students? And what is your typical lesson structure? And just take some time to think about whether those jive together, whether they fit together. Are your goals for your students aligned with what you're doing in your lessons? Now, what I don't want you to do is think about your traditional lesson structure, which, again, like my original lessons, might go scales, old pieces, new pieces, or it might be far more exciting than that. But whatever's in your typical lesson structure, I don't want you to throw it out. That's not what this is about. I want you to take those elements and creativize them. So we've already gamified theory concepts and all of this, but there's still stuff that happens every week that's going to be a standard part of the lesson, and that's where I think creativization can come in. So we're taking the elements, taking the creative side of music, thinking around the concepts and really outside the box, as overused as that phrase is, and then we're mashing it all together. And there are really 4 creative things that I'd like to bring more into more of our lessons. And this is sort of inspired by Forrest Kinney's creative arts. Definitely look up Forrest Kinney for that if you like, but I've added on one more because his 4 sides of music include reading, and I've taken that out of the equation, but I still have 4. So improvisation is the first one. How can we bring in improvisation? How can we use composing to teach what we're going to teach, or to fill that lesson, that part of the typical lesson structure? How can we bring arranging into our typical teaching? And this is my addition. How can we bring collaboration, playing with others into the lessons? So I want you to have a think about these 4. Again, this is in your worksheet. So over to you, and I'm going to ask you to hit pause again and fill this in. What elements are in your lesson? Just write down stuff that happens pretty much every lesson, most of the lessons, most weeks. And how could you creativize them? Because this is what could make the hugest difference. Rather than trying to cram improvisation into your lessons that already are full, like the gamification, how can you take that part of the lesson and creativize it? So have a brainstorm about each one, and how could you make it into improv? How could you make it into composing? How could you make it into arranging? Or how could you make it collaborative? So pause the video and then come back to me when you filled it in. Okay, welcome back. Make sure to write in the comments below about what are some of the ideas that came up for you, or what are the ones that you just cannot fill in. If you're like, but there is no way to make this element of the lesson collaborative, then write it in the comments. Let us know what it is, and we'll see if we can brainstorm with you. So briefly, some of my ideas for these to give you a quick rundown. For scales, improvisation. That's my go-to. Just improv. You play some kind of accompaniment and your student improvises with their scale. Get them to compose using their scale. It could be just a 4-bar piece. It doesn't need to be a big thing, but it could be an assignment. It could be something you do in the lesson where they compose using a new scale. Have them do their written work by using scale. So getting them to do their theory and other things using scales. Become a scale detective. So thinking about scales and finding them in their pieces. Backing tracks. This is a way to make it collaborative in a way, because it's like they're playing with a band. You could actually have them build a band. I like to do this in GarageBand. So in GarageBand on the iPad, you can use smart instruments, so they can add a guitar using chords that they know, add a drummer, and then play their scale along with that. Add rhythm and lyrics to make it, again, a kind of composition activity. Or verbal scales. This is a way to think about scales out loud. For new pieces, how can we make that creative and interesting? Well, we can have them colour in the new pieces and do their theory that way, like I did with the gamification with the intervals idea earlier. They could improvise using the rhythm from their piece. They could create using the harmony of the piece. They could work on a scale, write a story based on their scale, act out the dynamics, or use practice games. And then oral work. Well, we could work with solfa identification like I did with do re mi. That's very creative. We could have them dance. We could use solfa sidestep, a game like that. We could have them improvise again. That builds up their ear training and all that stuff. Folk songs, take folk songs and have them sing them, turn them into solfa, leave out bits, do bits in your head, that kind of thing. Harmonizing their anything. So if you have a single line piece, how can you get them to harmonize that? That's a great way to build up their ear training. And then taking those pop songs and having them work out those by ear, and also drumming along with stuff, is a great way to build up their sense of oral rhythm. So if you have questions from anything I've talked about today, It's been a big topic to cover, so I'd love to hear your questions in the comments below. Do let me know if there's anything I can help you out with, and I hope you've enjoyed today's presentation. Thanks for watching.